you point out that the government has lifted spending, but the RBA governor was recently asked about this in Senate estimates, and Phil Lowe said the budget is not inflationary. He said it's neutral. So do you think he's got it wrong when he says that?
Well, we need better than neutral, Sharri. We need a government that is putting downward pressure on inflation and downward pressure on interest rates. I mean, if the best the government can boast is that it's neutral, that's failure. We need downward pressure. Australians out there don't want neutral. They want inflation gone. They want these high interest rates dealt with. And not only is fiscal policy all wrong, we're seeing industrial relations policy that's making the situation worse. And in fact, Phil Lowe has made the point, deep concerns about that, and productivity that is in freefall. We saw an 11% gain in labour productivity in the time we were in government. Almost half of that has gone in the last year since Labor
we've been speaking about productivity on this program, but again, the RBA says that productivity has been falling for the past 3 years. Labor's only been in government for a little over a year. So, you know, the coalition needs to take some responsibility here as well for falling productivity, particularly given reforms. You know, productivity takes a while to turn around. This is long-term reform that's needed.
Well, Sharri, let's go to the facts. Labor productivity rose 11%. Labour productivity, which is what we're talking about here, because they're concerned about what's happening in the labour market, rose 11% when we were in government. It was rising consistently across those that close to a decade. It has fallen 4.6% in the last year. That's almost half wiped out. Now, you know, Labor's talking points miss the facts. And they miss the facts because what we're seeing is a government that doesn't understand economics, doesn't understand what causes inflation, certainly doesn't understand what deals with it. And the fact of the matter, Sharri, is we've got a Prime Minister who doesn't treat it as a priority. That the senior economic advisor in the bureaucracy, Stephen Kennedy, the Secretary of the Treasury, has not been asked to brief the Prime Minister on inflation because the Prime Minister wants to talk about everything except for cost of living and inflation.
I just want to ask you about inflation.
It's the number one issue.
About inflation. Are you worried that it is now becoming entrenched or sticky? Because, as you point out, the underlying inflation rate only fell from 6.5 to 6.4%.
Yeah, I mean that's the deep concern. It's not just my concern. I think if you talk to many economists, they'll say the concern is we are stuck at a level well above the target band, which is 2 to 3%.
Are we seeing stagflation then?
Well, we're certainly seeing a slowing economy, and the economy is shuddering to a halt. In the last quarter, it was negative on a per-person basis. It's 0.2%. In absolute terms, you know, that is as close to zero, almost as close to zero as you can get. So there's no question we are in a position where you've got persistent inflation, you've got the economic growth shuddering to a halt, and that is approaching stagflation. There's no question about it.
And rising unemployment as well. Do you think we're going to likely see a recession in the second half of this year or early next year?
Well, I'm not going to make forecasts. I'll leave that to others. Jim Chalmers loves to make forecasts all the time, Sharri. But what I will say is that
is it something you're concerned about? I mean, you are the Shadow Treasurer. This is what people are so worried about. Australian families are really worried that we're going to fall into a recession. So are you concerned about that?
Oh, no question, no question. I mean, the risks are very real, and we need a government that's doing everything it can to reduce those risks, and that means taking pressure off inflation and all of those areas of policy. Energy policy we haven't talked about as well. I mean, all of these areas of policy, we need every minister focused on the job, and we need a Prime Minister who treats this as his first, second and third priority. Not the Canberra Voice or all sorts of other things that he's obsessed with. This has got to be his top priority.
If you were the Treasurer, would you be replacing Phil Lowe? This is the most important appointment, the single most, arguably even more important than the Prime Minister. Would you be replacing Phil Lowe?
You know, Sharri, I get this question a lot, and there's a lot of speculation about it. But I tell you what the focus needs to be. It's government policy. and there's a reason for this. Reserve banks, no matter who's in the chair, doesn't matter who you put in the chair, it is extremely difficult for them to get the job done of getting inflation down, getting downward pressure on interest rates if government policy isn't helping. And this was the great lesson from past surges of inflation. So
I understand that fiscal policy needs to be moving with monetary policy, but Phil Lowe has made mistakes. He promised families, he encouraged Australians to take out loans, saying it wouldn't rise until 2024. We've now had 12 rises and more to come. So should he be replaced?
Well, there's no question that the Reserve Bank made some egregious errors in its forecasting and guidance some time back, and Australians entered into mortgage on the back of that, and they've paid a very high price for that. There's no doubt about that. I'm not going to get into this is an issue for the government. What I will say is it shouldn't make political appointments. It's made 2 appointments, which we have questioned. I mean, there's real question marks around one of those in particular, and they should not be union mates of the Labor Party. You've got to make sure that we get the most competent people
Sky News
into this role, but most of all,
reported that the Treasury Secretary is the front runner. Do you think that would be a political appointment?
Well, I think it's very important that we keep separation between the Reserve Bank and the independence of the Reserve Bank, and separation of that from the government. So that's a really crucial issue.
And so do you think
have the
that
Treasury Secretary sitting on the Reserve Bank?
appointing the Treasury Secretary would be a political appointment if she were to become the RBA governor?
Well, as I say, there's a real question mark about an appointment that would breach that independence, and I think that's something that they've got to look at closely. But Sharri, can I encourage you to keep focusing on what I think is the most important issue, creating economic environment where the Reserve Bank can put downward pressure on inflation and interest rates.
We talk about it every night on this show, inflation, productivity, whether the government's doing enough, whether the IR reform is counter to productivity. So we talk about it all the time. But it does sound like you would have concerns over the Treasury Secretary being appointed the RBA governor, that you're saying there would be questions over that.
Well, what I would say is every appointment has to be made on the basis that you maintain the integrity and independence of the Reserve Bank, you put highly competent people into those board roles, and they're not appointed on the basis of them being mates of the Labor Party or union buddies. And, of course, there was a process laid out for these appointments very carefully in the Reserve Bank review. The government has said they support the Reserve Bank review.
She's a mate of the Labor Party. Is she a political appointment?
But look, at the end of the day, the point I was about to make was that the Reserve Bank review, which the government has said its support, has laid out a process for making these appointments. The government should follow that process.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor.